Recognition, power, and influence is your birthright, and this podcast shows you how to get there. Welcome to episode number 231. Today's episode is in response to an overwhelm that I know some of you might be feeling when we look at the leadership table and we don't see, any movement. We see a lot of people who don't look, act, and think like us. And we also don't see any opportunities for movement and being able to insert ourselves into that leadership table. So even when organizations are trying, they can't seemingly, and I'm going to tell you some of the ways, find room for us at the top. So in today's episode, I'm sharing with you some of the ways that my women are getting their own voice at the table, ways that they are making their own progress, and ways that they get themselves into higher level leadership positions and then in turn are able to be that change and begin to lift and include other women at the top. This is how I am changing the leadership table. And this is truthfully the only way that I know how to change it is by getting you promoted. So in today's episode, I'm giving you some examples of how that's working for my clients and some ideas if you feel disheartened, as you should, by the look and feel of your current executive team. All right, let's get started.
Welcome to Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and I teach you how to get promoted, get paid, and bring your whole self to the leadership table. I am on a mission to change organizations from the C-suite out because women are the new face of leadership, and we are doing it on our terms.
Hello, corporate badasses. Welcome to another episode of Women Changing Leadership. I'm your host, Stacy Mayer, and super excited to be here with you again this week. Today's podcast episode is a little bit unexpected for me. I hadn't planned on recording this podcast episode, but I received an email after the episode aired last week, and it asked a very specific question of me. And so then it got me thinking, and I was like, oh, I have a really specific answer to this question, and I would love to turn that into a podcast episode. And also, when the woman reached out to me, she said, if you can please make this one of your podcasts, I would really appreciate it. And as a woman who makes very quick and thoughtful strategic decisions, I figured, why not do it right now? So let me share with you the question that was posed, and then we'll dive into what my answer is to this. So in last week's episode, I was in interview with Hadi Mendez, and we were talking about ways that we could bring more awareness and diversity to the leadership table. And one of the topics that came up in that conversation was the idea of intentionality. And without simplifying the need for how we're going to create a real game plan to get more women into leadership, it really does start with intentionality. So first of all, every challenge that we face in life, in the workplace, starts with awareness. If you can't even see the problem, you certainly can't fix it. Then we move into intentionality. And then what I'm going to share with you on today's episode are some of the ways that we're actually taking action to change the leadership table and the work that I'm doing with my clients. So the question for me that was posed was under this idea of what leaders can do to bring more women into higher level leadership positions. She felt like she wanted to hear more case studies and ways that this has happened at organizations and ways that I've witnessed this shift happening. So let me give you a little bit more backstory. I'm going to paraphrase her email a little bit. So Krista was also explaining to me that there was an all-hands meeting recently where there were 10 executive leaders speaking and answering questions at this all-hands, and they all happened to be male leaders. One of the top leaders of the organization is very committed to bringing more women into leadership positions, but he says that his hands are tied because none of these men are going to leave anytime soon, quote unquote. And so he felt like he was at a loss for how he can help women. And of course, she has been identified as a future female leader at her organization. And she is also at a loss for how she can become part of the executive team someday, especially at an organization that is so top heavy with male leadership. And so that's really her question to me is, have you seen this happen? I would really love to hear from you some case studies on how other major corporate businesses who suffered from the same problem of male domination at the leadership level changed this up to bring a lot more women into the fold. The other piece that the male executive leader has mentioned is that he's going to continue to advance women into higher level leadership positions, but just not the highest because it's already full. And actually, I'll just quote her because it's slightly obnoxious, but it says, these men are friends, they have families, they have mortgages, and he can't push any of them out. I'm laughing because that is not what we're trying to do here as women who want to have a seat at the table. We're not looking to push any man out of the executive suite to say, hey, make room for us. We're coming through, right? I don't care about your mortgage. Anyway, that's a little bit of a rant and kind of obnoxious. So I wanted to kind of be annoyed at that for a half a second. Thank you for playing. All right, now back to the problem at hand. So I first wanted to say that if we're going to change the leadership table, we need awareness around it. So this organization has a great deal of awareness that there are too many men at the top. Great, fine, perfect. Now we move into intentionality. And what I mean by intentionality is actually doing something about it. And a lot of men or even female leaders will say, this is just too hard to fight. So, while it'd be great to have intentionality around bringing more women to the leadership table, one, we don't have any open positions. And two, you'll hear a lot of times there's no qualified positions. So then, therefore, there's not really a whole lot that we can do about it. So we're just going to go back to work, essentially. So that's usually where the conversations stop in terms of advancement into higher level leadership positions. One is, I don't even have awareness. Then when we have awareness, we don't know how to fix it. So we just kind of go back to work. And we end up giving sort of terrible advice to women, work hard, get rewarded. Your time will come. Stick it out. Don't worry. We'll put you in this leadership development program. We'll give you awards. We'll give you pats on the back, but we'll never actually give you that seat at the table. So there is a transparency at this organization that I truly appreciate. I think it's fantastic that they know. And I also think it's fantastic that Krista's reaching out for case studies to pass along to her executive leadership team to actually say, hey, here is some of the ways that support for women is helping and working at the leadership table. So now into the work that I'm doing and some of the ways that I am starting to shift this narrative and actually seeing more women get promoted into those higher level positions, even at very male-dominated, top-heavy organizations. And I need to start with my particular point of view. So I need you to know, as I go into this podcast episode, that I have a very specific point of view on the way that I can help this problem. And that is one person at a time. For me personally, I am not motivated by huge problems. I live in Berkeley, California. I'm not the person who goes to the protests, the marches. I believe in these causes, but I'm not on the front lines. And I am not somebody who wants to or even thinks that I could change the entire world. The way that I believe that I can change the entire world is one woman at a time. I truly believe that if we want to change the system, if we want to change the leadership table, if we want to bring our voices to the leadership table, that it starts from one person, one person, one person. I also believe in larger organizations that are passing laws, that are creating diversity and inclusion departments, that are on a larger mission to change the organization as a whole, to fix the systemic problems at these organizations. And I champion those people as well. And we need that. But what I am saying is that I am not that person. I am helping one woman at a time. Now that leads me to my next point, which is that I do get asked, how can we bring more diversity to the leadership table? And I say, get yourself promoted. That is the best way that you can advocate for more women, is to actually be in a position of influence and power. So let's say, for instance, at this organization with 10 male leaders at the top, if one of those leaders was female, and here's the caveat, actually had influence at her company, because a lot of women will be at the top but not actually have a voice. If she actually has that voice, then she can begin to bring opportunities for other women to advance into higher level leadership positions. She can start to open that door for more and more women to be able to get recognition, to get exposure, to have that seat at the table even before the titles arrive, so on and so on. So if you really want to help on this mission, get yourself promoted. If I was coaching Krista and she was asking me directly, what can I do personally? I'm like, well, get yourself into a position of influence and power. So right now she's identified as a future female leader. She needs to start identifying as a current female leader and then find herself, if she's not, I have no idea what type of position she's in right now. If she's not in a leadership position, get herself into a leadership position. All of this, even at her current organization, is available to her. We're talking about the executive suite, which is one problem, but then there are the women who are in the middle who still aren't advancing to the executive suite. And so we can continuously advance and climb and climb and climb and bring other women up with us. And now we start to see those numbers change. We start to see things shift. The other piece of my process and the way that I work specifically with women is to make sure that they're bringing themselves to the leadership table while also understanding the needs of the leadership table. So a lot of women, one of the challenges that they face is that they lead with diversity as being their major selling point. So I don't actually have a problem with the term female leader. I think that's fantastic. But what happens is that if we're solely using the fact that we're a female leader as our selling point, then we're going to find ourselves in positions that, while we might have the skill set, the technical background, the subject matter expertise, maybe we've proven ourselves on certain projects, there are other leadership qualities where the leadership team doesn't truly see us as part of that team. And so the first thing, even if there is no room for movement, is to find ways to begin to integrate women into that conversation, like on a regular basis, because of their incredible leadership skill set, not because they bring a differing point of view, but because they belong at that table. Those are two very different things. And a lot of times we are leading so much with our diversity and our difference that we're not actually acknowledging our sameness. And so one of the things that I'll work with clients on is, why do you deserve that voice at the table today? What is it? How are you going to hold your own in these conversations? So I coach women directly at all stages of the pipeline, whether there are future female leaders, current female leaders, or current members of the executive suite. And when I am coaching women who are current members of the executive suite, I am coaching them to literally take what is in their brain and say their process out loud. We spend a lot of time in our conversations talking about communicating, showing your work, saying your process. How did you come up with this conclusion? Why were you able to complete this project when nobody else was able to do it? when you start to share your process of working with difficult employees, of solving big problems, of coming up with strategic initiatives, not the strategic initiative itself, but how you came up with that strategic initiative, now you are showing them that you're one of them. You are the same, but on the other side, you think differently. So that's the part about bringing our whole selves to the leadership table, is that we also have to understand that we communicate, we solve big problems the same as them, but the way that we're going to solve it might look different than them. Hopefully it does. Hopefully we see the answers in ways, and a lot of times my women are smarter than the rest of the room. Like, they get it. And these men, they're not getting it. They're just not seeing the answers. And so my women are able to put and connect the dots, but then they can't communicate how they connected the dots. So they're just leading with, here's the dots connected, don't you see? And then the leaders are like, no, I don't really see. That sounds very different. And I can understand that you're valuable, but I don't want you at the table. They're not going to admit that, but they don't want you at the table. If they wanted you at the table, they're going to find room for you at the table. All right, I'll say that again. If they wanted you at the table, they're going to find room for you at the table. So that is one piece, is that we're actually starting to communicate that sameness. Now, here are some of the results that I have seen for clients is once we really understand what our purpose is and why we want to have that voice at the table, why we deserve to have that voice at the table, why we're motivated to have that voice at the table, then we actually create a pathway. And so one of the things that she was asking me was like, what is my path? And I would say, go back to my episode where I talk about putting together a promotion path with your boss and figure it out. Like, there's a lot of different things that you can put on your promotion pathway. And that's another thing that I work with clients on, is we build out the blueprint together. And then you can start to have open conversations with the executive team or your boss or whoever else to actually make that pathway and see if that pathway is actually viable for you. Now, if you are one of those leaders that is right at the leadership table and you're like, there's literally no place for me to go, then start to figure out what kind of experiments that you can play to get yourself that voice at the table. And also look for and be willing to look for a job at another organization where you can truly have that voice. So a lot of times women, once they stop putting up with the bullshit at their companies, like, oh, it's just the way it is. Man, wouldn't it be nice if we had a seat for you here? But you know what? I'm sorry. We're just out of seats. Once you stop putting up with that bullshit and you go out and you start looking at other opportunities, you realize how much more money you could get paid elsewhere. You realize that there's actual other organizations who value your ideas right out of the gate. Then you come back to your current company with a renewed sense of cutting through the crap. There was also in this email a situation where she said her boss was actually pulled up onto stage as like the token diversity person, to speak and answer some of these questions, but she didn't have an actual position or title of the executive suite. She was the most junior person up there, but she was brought up there because she was a woman. And I would say, yes, that's a huge win. I don't think that's a problem at all. But what she has to do is follow that up with, wow, that was really great. Not only was I qualified because of my gender, here are all of the other valuable talking points that I brought to the table. So one of the things that the women who I work with have is they don't really mind the fact that they have to work harder than a lot of the men. Now, I say they don't mind, but of course they mind. And of course, it's incredibly annoying that we have to work twice as hard as everybody else. And, this fact that you have to show your work in order to get rewarded is like so key, that you have to proactively build allies in order to build trust at the executive suite is so key. But the faster that you can just sort of get over the disadvantage of that, the fact that us as women have to do all this work, then the more likely, one, you are to do it, and two, you are going to have success doing it. So the first thing is, like, even though we have to do twice as much as everybody else in order to get rewarded or not rewarded, right? We might do all of these strategic moves and then find ourselves still not getting promoted. But I will tell you that my clients don't put up with it for very long. They will leave their organizations and they'll find better and higher paying jobs very quickly. And, you always have the opportunity to go back if you really want to. But remember, the fastest way to get and lift up other women is to get yourself into a position of influence and power. All right, so you are finding yourself in a place where you can begin to show your work, to advocate for yourself. So you get pulled up on stage, you're the most junior person on stage. Have a follow-up conversation with somebody about what you brought to that conversation, not just because you were different or unique, but why you were so proud that you were able to point out XYZ. So now they start to see you as that person who has that viable voice that they need at the table now, today, right away, as fast as possible. The other thing it does is you start to see yourself as that. So a lot of us will know that we deserve that, to have that seat or that promotion, but we don't really understand so much why and how. And so I'll point out to you exactly why and how, and like, what was your actual skill set? Like, we would recap that conversation, and then I would tell her, oh my gosh, make sure you schedule a meeting with your skip level right now and let him know about what you said about XYZ. Like, because I can pinpoint what actually matters to the executive team. So when we start having that voice ahead of time, when we really own our value as a leader and not just a future potential leader, but a current leader, what is it? Who is it? How are we bringing more to the leadership table? Then we can really start to own that impact that we have at our companies. And the other piece is that organizations are much more fluid than we give them credit for. So things change quickly. We like to think that it's pretty solid at the top, but I have seen people leave who we never thought would leave. I've seen people retire who we never thought would retire. I've seen layoffs happen completely out of nowhere. I've seen women leave their companies completely out of nowhere for something else where they're really going to have that voice. When we start to just stop putting up with the bullshit, finding and paving our own path, things begin to catch up with us. Do I have exact numbers and proof that this shift is happening? No, not at the global level. The measurements, the increase of more women in higher level leadership positions is barely moving. We're barely moving the needle. But what I truly believe is that every single woman, just one woman, so that statistic to me means more than all the women. That one woman who gets herself into a skip level promotion where she goes from vice president to the C-suite, that matters. Having her have that voice at the table has the potential and the current probability of more and more women getting lifted up. It is the man who is saying, hey, let's put her into a leadership program so that she can feel valued. It is the woman who I helped get promoted who says, you know what? I am going to advocate for her. I'm going to give her a voice at the table. I'm going to call on her at meetings because I know what it takes to really get promoted. So when we can get more women, even just one person at a time, into these higher level positions, that's when the movement starts to occur. So I was thinking about a story to prepare for today's episode, and I thought I would share it at the beginning, but I forgot. And I think that's actually okay because now it's just a little bit of a reminder. So it is the story of Barbara Johns. Barbara Johns, you can Google her, and we'll also link to her biography in the show notes, was a teenager in Virginia. She ended up starting part of the civil rights movement. And she did this not as, I don't really like this term, like an accidental activist, but she did it one person at a time. So she was a teenager in Virginia during segregation, and she was in high school, and she noticed that the white people's high school was in very different condition than the high school that she had to go to. And it was the same high school, just that they were like across the street from each other in terms of resources, the actual condition of the building, the restrooms. There was no heat. The school facilities were dilapidated. The labs were inadequate. The books were handed down after being used for years at the white schools. And she was tired of it. So she single-handedly organized a protest, or I guess like a walkout, at the Black school to be able to pull the kids out of school and to say, hey, if you don't change our conditions, then we're not going to come back. So let's see, I'm going to read part of it. It said she first got teachers to bring the students to the auditorium, where she encouraged both students and teachers to leave the school and not return until local officials agreed to build a new school building. Eventually, the NAACP got involved in her plight, and on May 23rd, 1951, Robinson filed Davis versus County School Board of Prince Edward County. It set in motion the legal challenge that would become known as part of Brown versus Board of Education, which ruled school segregation unconstitutional. So Barbara Johns, to me, is the power of one woman that didn't set out to create a movement. She set out to have better conditions at her school. She got herself into a position of influence, and she was actually able to start influencing other people. She gained notoriety. Then she created a movement, but she took action herself first. And so if you are somebody listening to today's podcast episode and you feel at a loss, if you look up at your executive team and you see all male leadership and you say, I don't see a path in here for me, then I encourage you to take that step back. Yes, we need to change the entire leadership table. Yes, we need to shift these numbers. Yes, we need equal pay. Yes, we need more rights for women in leadership. We need to find ways to support more women in higher level leadership positions. But the best way that we're going to change the entire system is to change you, to get you in a position of influence and power, for you to begin to learn the skills of what it's going to take just to get your very, very next promotion. Yes, your long-term vision is to get in that C-suite, but right now you have to learn to think and communicate like an executive leader so that you can shift from being a future female leader to a current female leader into a current member of the executive suite. All right, thank you all so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye.
Before you go, I have a question for you. Do you know how close you are to your next promotion? Really? Not what your boss has told you, not what you even believe to be true, but have you actually taken the time to sit down, take an assessment, review the 5 categories that it takes to get promoted into senior executive leadership positions, and decided where you fall in each category, and given yourself a ranking on a scale of 1 to 10 of how close you are to getting your next promotion? Have you done this? Well, now's your chance. If that feels interesting to you and you're like, hey, I want to know exactly how close I might actually be, or how far away you might be, and what it's going to take to get you even closer, then I invite you to take my promotability quiz. This is a quiz that I put together with practical tips that actually tell you where you're lacking and where you're winning. What are the areas that you actually need to improve and not necessarily what your boss is telling you all the time, so that you can take concrete steps towards landing that next promotion and changing the face of the leadership table. Go to yourpromotabilityscore.com to take your free assessment today. Yourpromotabilityscore.com, and let me know how it goes.